The early morning sky over the Dutch countryside was a pale canvas of gray, streaked with the first hints of dawn. Thousands of Allied transport aircraft glided in tight formations, their engines droning over forests, rivers, and sleepy towns. Below, the patchwork of fields and canals stretched endlessly, a landscape that would soon become a crucible of fire, steel, and courage. Paratroopers of the British 1st Airborne, American 101st and 82nd Airborne, and Polish units gripped their rifles and packed gear as the moment approached. The tension inside each C-47 and glider was almost tangible. Men checked harnesses, tightened boots, and stared ahead, knowing that the next few hours would define the fate of the operation. Then, over the drop zones, the order came. Troop doors opened, and soldiers leaped into the wind. Canopies snapped open as paratroopers descended toward the landing zones, their silhouettes drifting against the dim light. Below, the fields were calm, deceptively peaceful, but already signs of German occupation were visible: machine gun nests hidden along tree lines, artillery positions dug into dikes, and patrols moving cautiously through villages. The first wave hit the ground with a mixture of shock and adrenaline. Some landed safely, rolling and rising to take positions, while others were scattered by unexpected wind gusts, tumbling into hedgerows and canals. Immediate fire from entrenched German defenders met the airborne troops, tracers streaked across the sky, and bursts of machine gun fire tore through the fields. Despite the chaos, training and discipline took over. Squads regrouped rapidly, establishing defensive perimeters while clearing nearby strongpoints. Engineers worked feverishly to disable obstacles and bridges that could be destroyed to slow the enemy advance. Tanks of the British Guards Armoured Division waited at designated landing zones, ready to link up with airborne units as soon as the glider-borne crews touched down. The German defenders responded swiftly. Waffen-SS infantry and Panzer grenadiers moved to intercept the scattered paratroopers. Artillery batteries opened fire along known drop zones, while flak cannons raked the skies, sending a deadly hailstorm toward approaching gliders and aircraft. Smoke and debris filled the air, turning the landscape into a chaotic theater of war. The paratroopers pressed on. American units pushed toward the vital bridges at Eindhoven and Nijmegen, moving quickly to secure crossings before German reinforcements could reorganize. British units focused on Arnhem, determined to seize the key bridge over the Rhine, knowing that the success of the entire operation depended on holding it. Soldiers crawled through ditches, strafed enemy positions, and threw grenades into fortified machine gun nests. Gliders arrived shortly after the first drops, delivering heavy equipment, anti-tank guns, jeeps, and supplies essential to hold the fragile positions established by airborne troops. Landing was treacherous. Some gliders crashed, sending men and equipment flying into the surrounding fields. Yet those who survived joined the fight immediately, adding critical firepower to the embattled paratroopers. By mid-morning, several key objectives had been partially secured. Small units defended captured road junctions, bridges, and villages, but the German response was relentless. Panzer divisions, alerted by radio intercepts and reconnaissance, began moving toward the drop zones. The Luftwaffe sent sorties to harass Allied ground forces, strafing roads and attacking artillery positions. Explosions shook the countryside as Allied paratroopers dug in, firing mortars and rifles at approaching armored threats. The fighting intensified in narrow streets, along canal banks, and across open fields. Every hedge, every building, every small rise became a potential killing ground. Close-quarter combat erupted as German infantry counterattacked, and paratroopers held their ground with grenades, rifles, and sheer determination. Tanks that had arrived from gliders provided vital support, using high-explosive shells to clear fortified positions while Shermans and Cromwells maneuvered through the flat Dutch terrain. Despite confusion and heavy casualties, momentum began to build. Allied airborne units, despite being scattered and outnumbered, showed extraordinary resilience. Engineers repaired bridges where possible, artillery observers called in devastating fire on enemy concentrations, and infantry squads executed daring flanking maneuvers. Each small victory was a step toward the larger goal, securing the bridges and creating a corridor for ground forces to advance from Belgium into the Netherlands. By late afternoon, the first signs of a tenuous Allied foothold emerged. Villages had been captured, key road junctions held, and scattered German resistance suppressed, though pockets of fierce opposition remained. Soldiers dug in for the night, aware that the coming hours would test their endurance and courage like never before. Across the sky, the fading sun cast long shadows over a landscape already scarred by combat, signaling that the struggle for Arnhem, Eindhoven, and Nijmegen had only just begun. The drop had succeeded in chaos, bravery, and determination, but the road to victory would be steep, bloody, and unforgiving. Operation Market Garden had begun, and the fate of the Allied advance into Germany rested in the hands of those paratroopers and glider-borne reinforcements, fighting tirelessly on the ground. The first light of dawn brought a harsh clarity to the battlefield. Paratroopers and glider troops who had landed under fire the previous day now faced the immense task of consolidating their positions. The Dutch countryside, deceptively calm beneath the morning fog, had been transformed into a patchwork of destruction, burned-out vehicles, shattered fences, and craters from artillery shells marking the advance of relentless combat. Allied units began to push toward their primary objectives, the vital bridges spanning the Rhine at Arnhem, Nijmegen, and the smaller crossings along the Maas. Every step forward was contested. German forces, though caught off guard initially, were now massing reserves and repositioning armored units. Reconnaissance reports from the Allies showed movement along forested lanes and through small villages, panzer grenadiers and infantry ready to strike any exposed positions. At Eindhoven, American paratroopers moved cautiously through the mist, scanning fields for snipers and hidden machine gun nests. Mortar teams set up quickly behind hedgerows, firing suppressive rounds at German positions that threatened the advancing columns. Explosions tore through the quiet morning as artillery and anti-tank fire engaged the enemy. Jeeps and small armored vehicles darted forward, providing reconnaissance and rapid mobility, while riflemen and engineers cleared obstacles along the roads. Meanwhile, British airborne units pressed toward Arnhem, their path lined with canals and tree lines that offered cover to both attackers and defenders. Glider-borne anti-tank guns were deployed to provide a vital line of fire against German armor reported moving from the south. Infantry moved in staggered lines, grenades and small arms at the ready, as the first volleys from German machine guns echoed across the countryside. Every building and farmstead became a potential ambush point, and soldiers adapted quickly, clearing rooms and firing from windows as they advanced. The Luftwaffe, sensing the concentration of Allied forces, launched intermittent sorties. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs roared across the skies, diving on artillery positions, transport vehicles, and the scattered columns of infantry. Anti-aircraft fire from Allied positions lit the morning sky with tracer streaks, creating a chaotic ballet of gunfire and smoke. Ground units pressed forward despite the danger from above, coordinating movements with spotters and forward observers to neutralize artillery and armored threats. German command, recognizing the strategic importance of the bridges, ordered armored counterattacks. Panzer IV and Panther tanks, supported by mechanized infantry, maneuvered along secondary roads, exploiting cover and shadows to strike at vulnerable Allied positions. Explosions from high-velocity shells tore through hedgerows and fields, throwing soldiers to the ground, while incoming fire pinned down infantry units. Yet the Allies' combined arms approach, artillery, mortars, tanks, and infantry, blunted the German momentum. Tanks fired on advancing columns while infantry used terrain to flank and engage in close-quarters combat when necessary. In the urban areas near Nijmegen, the fighting became even more intense. Narrow streets turned into killing zones. Allied paratroopers moved house to house, clearing resistance from fortified cellars and street corners. Smoke from burning buildings mingled with the dust of artillery craters, reducing visibility to mere meters. Communication between units became vital. Runners and radio operators relayed orders, coordinating attacks and reinforcements. Engineers detonated demolitions to prevent German forces from regaining fortified positions, while medics moved under fire to reach wounded soldiers. At Arnhem, the stakes were highest. British airborne units, advancing toward the bridge over the Rhine, faced elite German paratroopers and mechanized troops dug into defensive positions. Sniper fire from rooflines and trees slowed the advance, forcing squads to move tactically and coordinate suppressive fire. Anti-tank teams were under constant threat as German armor attempted to counter the Allied push. Glider-borne reinforcements arrived sporadically, delivering anti-tank weapons, ammunition, and medical supplies, sustaining the tenuous foothold that airborne forces had established. Across the battlefront, the interplay between mobility, firepower, and terrain defined the day's fighting. The Dutch landscape of canals, dikes, and small forests shaped each engagement. Tanks maneuvered across fields, taking advantage of open ground, while infantry used hedgerows and buildings for cover. Artillery observers constantly adjusted fire, targeting enemy positions that threatened the advance, while aircraft provided reconnaissance and close air support. By late afternoon, American and British units had captured several critical road junctions, linking up scattered paratrooper squads and solidifying supply lines. Small villages were under Allied control, though German resistance continued in pockets along the canals and river crossings. Casualties were mounting, but morale remained high. Soldiers understood the importance of the bridges to the larger operation. Despite these gains, intelligence reports indicated that German reinforcements were en route. Armored divisions, fresh infantry, and reserve artillery batteries were moving toward the front. Commanders prepared contingency plans, organizing defensive perimeters and fallback positions while planning further advances. Nightfall would not bring relief. Soldiers dug in under constant threat of artillery fire, patrols, and reconnaissance from the Luftwaffe. As dusk settled over the Dutch countryside, the bridges loomed in the distance, symbols of both hope and danger. Allied forces had gained ground, but the most crucial challenge remained, securing Arnhem and the Rhine bridge before German forces could consolidate. The next hours would test the courage, strategy, and endurance of airborne troops, armored units, and infantry alike. Operation Market Garden was underway, but the road to victory was fraught with fire, steel, and unrelenting opposition. The morning haze hung low over the outskirts of Arnhem, shrouding the city in a ghostly gray. Streets that had once been peaceful were now lined with barricades, rubble, and smoldering wreckage from previous engagements. British airborne troops, having landed days earlier, moved cautiously through the shattered town, every corner and alleyway a potential ambush. The Rhine Bridge, their ultimate objective, loomed in the distance, vital to the Allied advance into Germany, and fiercely defended by elite German paratroopers and panzer units. Intelligence had warned them of the Wehrmacht's strength, but the reality on the ground was even more formidable. German defensive positions were reinforced with machine guns, mortars, and strategically placed anti-tank weapons. The Luftwaffe still patrolled the skies, diving sporadically to harass infantry and armored units, while artillery fire from nearby German positions sent plumes of sand and debris into the streets. Close-quarters combat erupted immediately. British squads advanced in staggered formations, grenades and rifles at the ready. Every doorway, every building became a battlefield. Snipers fired from rooflines and hidden windows, forcing soldiers to advance slowly, clearing rooms with bayonets and grenades. Smoke and dust hung thick in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of burning buildings. In the open streets, armored vehicles maneuvered under constant threat. British Cromwell and Sherman tanks provided cover for advancing infantry, blasting German strongpoints with high-explosive rounds. Yet even these powerful machines were not immune. Panzer IVs and Tigers positioned along canals and narrow streets fired back, each shot a deadly threat to exposed soldiers and armored crews alike. Supply lines were stretched and fragile. Engineers and support units worked tirelessly to keep roads clear, repair damaged vehicles, and maintain communication lines. Glider reinforcements continued to arrive sporadically, delivering crucial anti-tank guns, ammunition, and medical supplies. Each drop was met with fire from German positions, forcing crews to fight immediately upon landing. American airborne units near Nijmegen faced similar challenges. Infantry moved across canal crossings, while engineers repaired and reinforced bridges under constant enemy fire. German Panzer grenadiers launched counterattacks, targeting both infantry and armor. Explosions ripped through fields, sending debris into the air and forcing troops to adapt rapidly to shifting conditions. Mortar teams and artillery observers worked in tandem, calling in fire on concentrated enemy formations to blunt their attacks. Air support played a decisive role. RAF Typhoons and American P-47 Thunderbolts strafed German positions, destroying armored vehicles and machine gun nests. Smoke and fire from these strikes illuminated the battlefield, casting long, dramatic shadows over streets, canals, and fields. Pilots communicated with forward observers, coordinating attacks that created narrow windows of opportunity for advancing Allied troops. In Arnhem, the British advance pressed toward the northern end of the bridge. Every building contested, every street a killing ground. Soldiers moved in small squads, clearing fortified cellars and sniper positions. Artillery support pounded German strongpoints just ahead of the infantry, while tanks fired down streets to suppress enemy fire. Despite their training and bravery, the airborne units were outnumbered and facing seasoned German defenders determined to hold the bridge at all costs. The German response was relentless. Reinforced panzer units moved through narrow streets and alleys, supported by machine gun teams and infantry. They exploited every opportunity to strike at the flanks of the advancing troops. Explosions, gunfire, and tracer rounds crisscrossed the streets, creating a chaotic and lethal environment. Allied troops adapted with suppressive fire, coordinated maneuvers, and careful use of cover, inching forward despite mounting casualties. Elsewhere, airborne units at Eindhoven worked to secure secondary objectives, preventing German reinforcements from reaching Arnhem too quickly. Anti-tank teams engaged incoming panzer columns, while infantry cleared villages and road junctions to maintain vital supply lines. Engineers rigged demolitions to slow German movements, creating temporary obstacles that bought precious time for the advancing troops. As the day wore on, the battle for Arnhem reached a critical point. British forces had secured parts of the northern approach to the bridge, but German defenses remained formidable. Fires from destroyed vehicles and buildings lit the city in stark contrast, smoke curling into the sky as soldiers fought desperately to maintain momentum. Communication between units was critical. Runners and radio operators relayed orders through streets filled with chaos, explosions, and gunfire. Despite the intensity of German resistance, the determination of the Allied paratroopers did not waver. Nightfall approached, and soldiers dug in wherever possible, preparing to hold positions under the threat of continued attacks and counteroffensives. Artillery crews continued to fire into enemy positions, tanks provided overwatch, and medics worked tirelessly to treat the wounded under perilous conditions. By evening, partial control of Arnhem's northern streets was achieved, though the bridge itself remained contested. Allied commanders understood the stakes. Holding these positions was critical to allow ground forces to link up from Belgium, enabling a breakthrough into Germany. The next hours would be decisive, and the paratroopers' resilience, courage, and coordination would determine the success or failure of Operation Market Garden. The battle raged on, streets filled with smoke, rubble, and the sounds of relentless combat. Each soldier understood that the fight for Arnhem was far from over. The Rhine bridge, the gateway to Germany, remained under German control, but the Allies were determined to take it, no matter the cost. Nightfall draped Arnhem in an uneasy darkness. Fires from burning buildings and wrecked vehicles cast flickering shadows across streets, alleys, and canals. Allied paratroopers dug into hastily prepared defensive positions, rifles and machine guns ready, while medics moved under the dim glow of lanterns and flares to treat the wounded. The city was a labyrinth of destruction, each corner a potential ambush. The Germans were far from idle. Commanders had gathered reinforcements, elite panzer grenadiers, armored tanks, and artillery units, ready to crush the tenuous Allied foothold in Arnhem. Movements could be detected in the faint light of dawn, armored silhouettes creeping along narrow streets, infantry advancing behind smoke and rubble, and flak cannons adjusting for potential airborne threats. Every building, every hedge, and every canal bank became a stage for the deadly confrontation. As dawn approached, the first German counterattacks began. Panzers maneuvered through streets previously thought secure, firing into buildings where British paratroopers had taken cover. The roar of engines and the crack of high-velocity shells reverberated through the city. Infantry advanced alongside tanks, using grenades and small arms to clear Allied positions, forcing soldiers to fight in deadly hand-to-hand and room-to-room combat. Smoke and dust filled the air, obscuring visibility and turning every street corner into a lethal trap. Allied forces responded with fierce determination. Machine guns raked advancing enemy infantry, mortars targeted clustered panzer units, and tanks fired high-explosive shells to suppress the German advance. Communication was critical. Runners navigated shattered streets under fire, relaying orders to coordinate defenses and counterattacks. Engineers worked under pressure to maintain barricades and clear rubble to allow for armored movement. The American airborne units at Nijmegen and Eindhoven faced similar threats. German panzer divisions, reinforced with mechanized infantry, launched counterattacks along the main roads and canal crossings. Allied anti-tank teams and artillery crews worked tirelessly to repel these assaults. Explosions tore through open fields, sending plumes of dirt and debris into the sky. Rifle fire, machine gun bursts, and mortars created a symphony of war, punctuated by the screams of tanks under fire. Close-quarters combat became unavoidable. British paratroopers in Arnhem fought room by room, clearing houses and cellars while grenades tore through barricades. German defenders used every advantage of terrain and fortification. Snipers picked off officers, while machine gunners suppressed streets, slowing the Allied advance. Yet the paratroopers adapted quickly, coordinating flanking maneuvers and supporting each other with covering fire. Tanks moved carefully through the narrow streets. British Cromwell and Sherman tanks engaged German Tigers and Panzer IVs in deadly duels. Shells struck walls, flipped debris, and sent sand and smoke into the air. Every shot counted, as armored support was crucial to maintain the precarious positions held by infantry. Glider-borne reinforcements brought additional anti-tank weapons and supplies, landing under heavy fire and immediately joining the battle. Air support provided a vital advantage, though limited by the urban environment. RAF Typhoons and P-47 Thunderbolts strafed known German positions outside the city, creating temporary openings for infantry advances. Artillery observers called in precise fire on German armor and strongpoints, helping to blunt counterattacks and allow resupply. Communication and timing were critical. One misstep could result in devastating losses. By midday, the Allied forces had managed to hold key streets and junctions, preventing the Germans from encircling Arnhem. Casualties were mounting on both sides, but discipline, training, and determination kept the paratroopers in the fight. Engineers continued to fortify positions, barricade streets, and maintain supply routes. Medics moved under fire, treating the wounded in makeshift field stations and canal banks. The German counterattacks intensified. Armored units attempted to flank positions while infantry pressed from multiple directions. Explosions from artillery, mortars, and tank shells shook buildings and streets, sending debris and smoke into the air. Allied paratroopers responded with precision, coordinating mortar fire, anti-tank shots, and close-quarters engagements. Every meter gained was a hard-fought victory. By evening, the city's northern and central streets remained contested. The Rhine bridge, still held by German forces, became the focal point of all strategy. British airborne commanders assessed the positions, reinforced the most critical areas, and prepared for the next wave of attacks. Communication lines between units were stretched but functional, coordinating infantry, armor, and artillery in a synchronized defense. Despite relentless German pressure, Allied morale remained high. Soldiers adapted to each new challenge, utilizing buildings, canals, and rubble to create fortified positions. Tanks and infantry covered each other's advances, while engineers repaired barricades and cleared debris to maintain mobility. Every defensive action was critical. Failure could allow the Germans to regain control of the bridge and jeopardize the entire operation. As night fell over Arnhem, the battle paused only momentarily. Fires continued to burn, smoke filled the streets, and artillery occasionally shattered the quiet. The British and American paratroopers, exhausted and battered, prepared for another day of relentless combat. The Rhine bridge remained just out of reach, a constant reminder of the stakes and the cost of failure. Operation Market Garden had reached its most critical phase. The Allies had secured positions in the city but faced relentless German counterattacks. The coming hours would determine whether Arnhem would fall into Allied hands or remain a deadly obstacle, shaping the course of the campaign in the Netherlands and the advance into Germany. The streets of Arnhem had become a labyrinth of smoke, rubble, and unrelenting gunfire. Allied paratroopers clung to every building, hedge, and canal bank, defending their hard-won positions from waves of German counterattacks. The Rhine Bridge, just beyond the city center, remained a symbol of both hope and despair, a prize that could decide the fate of Operation Market Garden. As dawn broke, the sound of distant artillery reminded the troops that German reinforcements were already en route. From the south and west, armored columns advanced cautiously, exploiting every available road and alley. Panzer IVs and Tiger tanks moved in coordinated formations, supported by infantry squads equipped with machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers. The German commanders understood the stakes. Capturing Arnhem and cutting off the airborne forces would cripple the Allied advance into the Netherlands. Allied forces, though scattered and under strength, responded with precision. Anti-tank teams positioned behind walls and dikes targeted approaching armor. Mortars fired in calculated arcs, raining shells on infantry concentrations, while riflemen and machine gunners held the streets. Every soldier knew that a single breach could allow German forces to penetrate deep into Allied-held positions, threatening the tenuous corridor stretching back to Eindhoven. Glider-borne reinforcements attempted to land near the embattled front lines. The skies above Arnhem were dangerous. Flak from German positions and strafing aircraft turned each descent into a life-or-death gamble. Despite this, pilots delivered anti-tank guns, ammunition, and essential supplies, often coming under immediate fire as their gliders touched down. Troops who survived the landing joined the defense instantly, bolstering units that had been fighting for hours without respite. In the northern districts of the city, British paratroopers faced relentless assaults. German infantry, often supported by light armor, attacked from multiple angles, attempting to breach fortified streets. Grenades and rifles exchanged fire in close-quarters combat. Soldiers moved from building to building, clearing cellars, attics, and basements of entrenched defenders. Smoke and dust choked the streets, obscuring vision and creating an almost surreal battlefield. Meanwhile, American units around Nijmegen fought to secure the Waal River crossings. Bridges were targeted by German artillery and sabotage teams, forcing engineers to repair and reinforce structures while under fire. Tanks provided overwatch along the riverbanks, firing into enemy concentrations to keep the German advance at bay. Infantry advanced cautiously, flanking fortified positions and coordinating with artillery observers to neutralize threats before they could strike. The Luftwaffe remained a constant menace. Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt fighters patrolled the skies, diving on Allied supply routes and artillery positions. Anti-aircraft fire from both ground troops and supporting tanks created a deadly canopy of flak, yet aircraft losses were sustained on both sides. Pilots adapted to the chaotic environment, using sudden dives and evasive maneuvers to strike critical targets and disrupt German movements. German armored assaults intensified by midday. Panzer IVs and Tigers maneuvered through streets, canals, and open fields, attempting to encircle Allied positions. Infantry teams accompanied the tanks, clearing buildings and streets with coordinated attacks. Explosions ripped through rubble-strewn streets, sending debris and smoke into the air. Allied anti-tank crews responded with every available weapon, engaging enemy armor at close range with Piats, bazookas, and artillery. British paratroopers defending the approach to Arnhem Bridge realized that holding the northern streets alone would not be enough. Communication with other units became critical. Forward observers coordinated artillery fire on German concentrations, marking positions with flares and smoke. Engineers cleared debris to create narrow corridors for armored counterattacks, attempting to relieve pressure on isolated squads. Each movement was calculated, every decision vital to survival. In Arnhem's central districts, fighting became a brutal mix of urban warfare and mechanized engagement. Tanks moved slowly, using buildings for cover while firing down streets to suppress German advances. Infantry squads advanced behind armor, engaging enemy positions in small, deadly bursts. German machine guns, mortars, and snipers forced soldiers to adapt constantly, using stealth, flanking maneuvers, and grenades to clear each position. Meanwhile, across the wider battlefield, Allied command worked to push ground forces from Eindhoven toward Arnhem. The corridor, a narrow lifeline, was under constant threat from German counterattacks along the roads. Tanks and infantry struggled to advance, often slowed by ambushes, artillery fire, and destroyed bridges. Every meter gained was a hard-fought victory, essential to maintain contact with airborne units holding the city. By late afternoon, partial successes emerged. Allied units had repelled several German counterattacks and maintained control of key streets, villages, and approaches to the bridges. Casualties were high, but morale remained remarkably resilient. Soldiers reinforced positions, shared ammunition and supplies, and treated the wounded amidst the chaos of continuous fighting. As evening fell, the city was scarred but not conquered. Fires burned across the streets, smoke mixing with the setting sun, casting the battlefield in stark contrast. The Rhine bridge remained just out of reach, still defended fiercely by German forces. Allied commanders understood the precariousness of the situation. The next push would determine whether Arnhem could be held long enough for reinforcements to link up from the south. Operation Market Garden had entered its most perilous phase. The airborne forces, though battered and outnumbered, held on with determination, courage, and tactical skill. German forces, relentless and well-equipped, pressed the attack, aware that every hour gained increased the likelihood of crushing the Allied corridor. The coming night would bring no rest, only preparation for another day of brutal combat. The dawn broke cold and gray over Arnhem, illuminating streets lined with rubble, abandoned vehicles, and makeshift barricades. Allied paratroopers, exhausted from days of unrelenting combat, adjusted their positions as German forces prepared yet another coordinated counterattack. Every step forward had been bought with blood, and every meter of territory was now under relentless scrutiny by experienced Wehrmacht and SS units. German commanders, understanding the fragile situation of the airborne units, launched a series of armored assaults combined with infantry maneuvers aimed at collapsing the Allied foothold. Panzer IVs and Tigers maneuvered along the narrow streets, using rubble and buildings for cover while firing into entrenched positions. Artillery barrages thundered in waves, targeting road junctions, barricades, and any visible concentration of troops. Smoke, dust, and fire filled the streets, reducing visibility to mere meters and turning the battlefield into a chaotic maze of danger. British paratroopers defending the northern approach to Arnhem Bridge moved with calculated precision. Small squads used hedgerows, buildings, and canal banks as defensive positions, firing at every exposed target. Snipers targeted German officers, mortars pummeled advancing infantry, and anti-tank teams engaged armored vehicles with Piats and bazookas. Despite heavy losses, coordination and discipline allowed them to resist encirclement. American units at Nijmegen and Eindhoven faced similar pressure. German Panzer grenadiers attempted to sever the narrow Allied corridor linking Arnhem to the south. Bridges were targeted, roads mined, and artillery focused on slowing reinforcements. Engineers and infantry worked tirelessly under fire to repair routes, clear obstacles, and keep the lifeline open. Every repaired bridge and cleared road was essential for the survival of the paratroopers at Arnhem. The Luftwaffe remained a persistent threat. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs strafed road columns and artillery positions, while flak units fired at incoming gliders and supply aircraft. Allied anti-aircraft crews and supporting tanks returned fire, engaging aircraft with heavy bursts, but each sortie brought a deadly risk to soldiers on the ground. Glider reinforcements still attempted to land under fire, delivering ammunition, medical supplies, and anti-tank weapons, with crews often forced to join the front lines immediately after landing. Inside Arnhem, the battle reached a critical stage. British paratroopers faced waves of German infantry and armor attempting to retake streets and neighborhoods. Explosions rocked buildings, mortar shells tore through streets, and tracer rounds painted deadly lines across smoke-filled avenues. Soldiers moved tactically, clearing buildings and fortifying positions, but every advance was contested fiercely. Communication and coordination became vital, with forward observers and runners relaying orders across the shattered urban landscape. As the day progressed, casualties mounted. Medics moved under fire, attending to the wounded while ammunition and supplies were ferried forward by volunteers risking everything. Soldiers used every available resource, anti-tank guns, rifles, grenades, and makeshift barricades, to maintain defensive lines. The Rhine bridge remained out of reach, guarded fiercely by German paratroopers and reinforced by tanks and artillery. Reinforcements from the south struggled to reach the airborne units. The narrow corridor was constantly threatened by German attacks, with roadblocks, mines, and ambushes delaying their advance. Tanks and infantry moved cautiously, providing covering fire while engineers cleared paths and repaired damaged bridges. Every hour of delay increased the pressure on the paratroopers holding Arnhem. The Luftwaffe attempted to exploit these delays, focusing on artillery positions and supply lines, but Allied air support responded with strafing runs and precision bombing. The combined arms strategy, air support, artillery, infantry, and armor, was the only thing keeping the corridor partially intact. Yet the tension was palpable. The Allied foothold in Arnhem was dangerously thin, and any breakthrough by German forces could have catastrophic consequences. In the urban center, heroic acts were commonplace. Small squads of British paratroopers held entire streets, fending off waves of attackers. Engineers rigged demolitions to block armored advances, while infantry flanked German positions to relieve pressure on pinned-down comrades. Smoke, fire, and the sound of gunfire filled every alleyway, creating an almost cinematic scene of desperation and courage. By evening, partial reinforcements had begun to link up with the airborne units, stabilizing some sections of the city. However, the Rhine bridge remained heavily contested, and German counterattacks showed no signs of relenting. Commanders assessed the situation, aware that the coming night would not bring rest but a strategic pause before the next series of assaults. The paratroopers' endurance was tested to its limits. Exhaustion, injuries, and dwindling supplies made each decision critical. Yet the soldiers held firm, understanding that their survival and the success of Operation Market Garden depended on their ability to withstand the relentless German pressure. The fate of the advance into Germany hung in the balance, and Arnhem was the linchpin of this audacious plan. As darkness fell, fires and smoke illuminated the city in stark contrast, painting the streets in shades of black, white, and gray, a battlefield frozen in time. Soldiers dug in, fortified their positions, and prepared for another night of relentless combat, knowing that each hour survived brought them closer to either salvation or annihilation. Operation Market Garden had entered its most precarious stage. The Allies had managed to hold ground, but the German onslaught was unyielding, and the Rhine bridge remained a contested prize. The next day would prove decisive in the struggle for Arnhem, and the courage, skill, and resolve of the paratroopers would be tested as never before. Dawn broke over Arnhem, the city still scarred from days of unrelenting combat. Fires from destroyed vehicles and buildings cast long shadows over streets filled with rubble and debris. British paratroopers, weary and battered, had held their positions through relentless German counterattacks, but supplies were dwindling, ammunition scarce, and casualties mounting. The Rhine bridge loomed in the distance, a tantalizing yet perilously defended prize that would determine the success of Operation Market Garden. German forces, sensing the strain on Allied defenders, intensified their assaults. Panzer divisions maneuvered with precision through narrow streets, firing into buildings and streets occupied by paratroopers. Mortar and artillery fire pounded defensive positions, while infantry squads advanced methodically, clearing houses and alleys with grenades and submachine guns. The cacophony of battle, explosions, gunfire, and screams, echoed across the shattered city. British units at the northern approach to the bridge were stretched thin. Men fought from barricades, ditches, and the remnants of houses, every available weapon employed against the advancing enemy. Anti-tank teams targeted German armor at close range, using every ounce of training and ingenuity to compensate for dwindling numbers. Soldiers moved from building to building, clearing cellars and attics, while coordinating fire with neighboring squads to repel enemy advances. Meanwhile, American airborne units around Nijmegen worked desperately to keep the corridor to Arnhem open. Engineers repaired bridges, cleared rubble, and maintained roads under constant fire, while tanks and infantry engaged German forces attempting to sever the lifeline. The narrow corridor was a lifeline for Arnhem, and every meter gained by reinforcements meant the difference between survival and annihilation for the paratroopers inside the city. The Luftwaffe continued sporadic harassment, targeting supply lines, artillery positions, and moving columns. Allied anti-aircraft units and air support responded, engaging aircraft with bursts of tracer fire. RAF Typhoons and P-47 Thunderbolts struck German positions outside the city, providing fleeting but crucial support to the embattled paratroopers. Every sortie counted, as air support allowed units to hold key streets and junctions under constant threat. Inside Arnhem, fighting reached a fever pitch. The British paratroopers launched counterattacks to reclaim lost streets, using grenades, rifles, and mortars to push back German infantry. Every building was a battleground, every street a deadly corridor. Casualties continued to mount, but discipline and resolve allowed soldiers to maintain defensive lines, preventing German forces from gaining complete control of the city. Reinforcements from the south inched closer. Tanks, infantry, and engineers worked in tandem to clear obstacles, secure bridges, and keep roads open for the desperate march toward Arnhem. German units attempted to ambush these advancing forces, laying mines, setting up roadblocks, and using artillery to disrupt movement. Despite these efforts, Allied forces pressed forward, determined to relieve the airborne troops before the city fell entirely. The Rhine bridge remained fiercely contested. German defenders, aware of its strategic importance, entrenched themselves in fortified positions with machine guns, mortars, and supporting armor. Paratroopers launched daring assaults, risking everything to push closer to the bridge. Smoke, fire, and debris filled the streets, painting a surreal yet horrifying tableau of urban combat. Each advance was met with heavy resistance, forcing soldiers to improvise, adapt, and fight with unmatched determination. By late afternoon, critical link-ups with advancing ground forces began to occur. Small pockets of paratroopers were reinforced by tanks and infantry, allowing temporary stabilization of key streets and junctions. Engineers cleared paths and repaired makeshift barricades, enabling essential supplies to reach isolated units. Medics continued to move under fire, treating the wounded and maintaining morale among exhausted soldiers. Despite these partial successes, the situation remained perilous. The German counterattacks showed no signs of abating, and the city's defenders were stretched to the limit. Yet the paratroopers' courage and tenacity held the line. Every building, every street corner, every canal bank was defended with relentless determination. The Rhine bridge, still just beyond reach, remained the ultimate objective and a symbol of hope for the Allies. As evening fell, the intensity of combat did not diminish. Fires burned across streets and buildings, smoke curling into the sky as artillery and gunfire continued unabated. The British and American paratroopers, though battered and fatigued, prepared for the night, fortifying positions, redistributing ammunition, and planning for renewed attacks at first light. Operation Market Garden had reached its climax. Arnhem, the linchpin of the operation, remained in Allied hands, but only barely. The coming hours would determine whether the airborne forces could hold the city long enough for full reinforcements to arrive, or whether German counterattacks would finally crush the tenuous foothold. Every soldier understood the stakes, the cost, and the peril, yet none wavered. The fate of the advance into Germany rested on their courage and endurance. The final day in Arnhem dawned cold and gray, the city still scarred by days of relentless fighting. Streets once lined with quaint houses were now rubble-strewn battle zones. Smoke from burning vehicles and shattered buildings lingered in the air, mingling with the acrid smell of gunpowder and fire. The British paratroopers, weary, bloodied yet resolute, knew the stakes: hold their positions at all costs, or the entire operation would collapse. German forces, determined to reclaim Arnhem, mounted their most aggressive assaults yet. Panzer divisions maneuvered with lethal precision, supported by infantry, artillery, and machine gun teams entrenched in fortified positions. Tigers and Panzer IVs roared down streets, firing into barricades and buildings where the paratroopers had taken cover. Mortar fire rained down continuously, shaking buildings and sending plumes of dust and debris into the air. Inside Arnhem, small squads of paratroopers executed heroic last stands. They held every street, alleyway, and corner against overwhelming odds, using rifles, grenades, and anti-tank weapons to repel advancing German units. Every position lost was immediately contested, every retreat measured and calculated to maintain a defensive perimeter around the city's key areas. Soldiers moved with precision under fire, communicating through runners, radios, and hand signals amidst the chaos. British units at the northern approach to the Rhine bridge faced relentless attacks. German machine guns and snipers pinned down infantry, while tanks attempted to force through barricades. Paratroopers coordinated closely with anti-tank teams, using Piats, bazookas, and captured armor to stop enemy advances. The bridge itself remained contested, a focal point for both sides. Each meter gained by either side came at an enormous cost. American airborne units supporting the Arnhem corridor fought simultaneously at Nijmegen and Eindhoven. German Panzer grenadiers attempted to sever the narrow Allied supply route, laying mines and ambushing tanks. Engineers worked under fire to repair bridges, clear rubble, and maintain vital roadways, while infantry engaged in deadly firefights to protect the lifeline. Supplies, reinforcements, and ammunition moved slowly, each convoy risking attack from German artillery and aircraft. The Luftwaffe continued intermittent attacks. Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs strafed supply columns, artillery positions, and scattered paratroopers. Allied anti-aircraft units responded, creating a deadly skyward duel, while Typhoons and P-47 Thunderbolts struck German positions outside the city to provide crucial breathing space. Each airstrike, each volley of flak, played a decisive role in the urban battlefield below. By midday, it became evident that the Allied hold on Arnhem could not be maintained indefinitely. Supplies were exhausted, casualties mounting, and German forces had achieved local numerical superiority. Commanders made the difficult decision: the surviving paratroopers would withdraw in an organized retreat to preserve the remnants of the force for future operations. Engineers prepared exit routes, demolitions were set to slow German pursuit, and small rearguard units held positions long enough for the bulk of troops to move safely. The withdrawal was executed under extreme duress. Soldiers moved through streets still littered with rubble and corpses, firing at advancing German units to cover their comrades. Tanks and armored vehicles provided suppressive fire, while medics and support teams helped the wounded navigate the treacherous streets. Explosions from German artillery and mortars shook the city, creating deadly hazards at every turn. Despite the orderly retreat, heroic last stands continued. Small squads stayed behind to delay the enemy, engaging in close-quarters combat with overwhelming odds. Grenades, rifles, and flamethrowers were used to hold buildings and intersections as long as possible. Each act of courage allowed hundreds of paratroopers to escape the encirclement, preserving experienced soldiers for future campaigns. By late afternoon, the surviving Allied forces had withdrawn from Arnhem, leaving behind a city marked by destruction but secured in memory as a testament to courage, tenacity, and sacrifice. German forces, exhausted yet unyielding, reclaimed the streets, but the resilience of the paratroopers had ensured that the operation, though incomplete, inflicted significant losses and tied down German divisions at a critical time in the Netherlands. The Rhine bridge remained contested during the final withdrawal, but the Allies had achieved temporary strategic objectives, delaying German reinforcements, maintaining pressure across the front, and demonstrating the audacity of airborne operations on a massive scale. The paratroopers' bravery under fire became legendary, a story of determination in the face of overwhelming odds. As night fell, Arnhem lay silent but haunted. Fires burned low, smoke rose in thin plumes, and the shattered city became a graveyard of machines, vehicles, and memories of battles fought fiercely. Operation Market Garden had not achieved all its goals, but it showcased the courage, discipline, and coordination of Allied forces in one of World War II's most daring and intense campaigns. The sacrifices at Arnhem, Nijmegen, and Eindhoven underscored the brutal reality of war. Victory demanded courage, resilience, and sometimes, the willingness to retreat strategically in order to fight again. The soldiers who survived carried the weight of their comrades' sacrifices, the lessons of urban warfare, and the indomitable spirit of airborne operations into the next chapters of the conflict. Operation Market Garden concluded, not with total victory, but with a testament to the bravery of men fighting against formidable odds, leaving behind a legacy of valor, strategic insight, and the harsh lessons of war that would echo across Europe for decades to come.